I usually start with straight lines. See, I'm marking out a grid using boxes, drawing 8 of them to kind of figure out the size of the head. And the size of the head is going to tell me how big the rest of the body is relatively to the head and the proportions in general. So you see I'm kind of erasing that grid that I've laid out because I don't need it anymore. And after I've finished with getting the proportions down, or roughly the size of the figure, I'm kind of going in and finding negative shapes, like the space between the forearm and the shoulder in relation to the head. That's negative space, as well as the space between the two legs. So for this piece, I'm using multiple references, kind of combining them to kind of figure out what kind of pose I want for this character. So I'm focusing on the torso because it's kind of going to tell me which way the legs are going to face, because I'm trying to capture a walking pose. He's kind of in distress, you know. So I kind of want to figure out like how he's going to balance himself based on the body language from his torso up. That's why you see me focusing on what that looks like first. I'm kind of changing my music in between. So the arm is very interesting because it's kind of in a foreshortening. He's kind of in a 3/4 position, and the arm on his forehead, he's kind of stressed out, and he's walking away from a character who's off camera, and his elbow is coming towards the viewer. So I'm kind of focusing on like that foreshortening, and I took multiple photos of myself in this pose, kind of stressed out, kind of acting it out, trying to figure out what angle would work best. And when you're using references, you kind of want to figure out the best way to combine those references while still staying true to the proportions as well as the orientation of the body. Just it's all about planes and facets. If the body's in a 3/4 view, you're not going to draw the torso facing forward, kind of like what I'm doing right now. That's pretty bad, and at this point I'm kind of frustrated with that. So I'm going to come back to the torso and kind of fix that later on. You see, I'm kind of going back and fixing the arm because I'm not too pleased. This is just a sketch, so I kind of get to experiment, figure out what's working and what's not. So I realized that with for it to be more emotional, I kind of wanted to be more dramatic and have the elbow going up instead of straight forward. So like he's kind of like arched back. You see the nice curve that's swooping from the torso down into that other leg that I just changed. Have all the fingers showing a little more, because I want you to see that he kind of, I don't know if you've ever done that, but you kind of put your hand to your head and creates this tension, and that's why the muscles are a little flexed as well. So I think at this point I was pretty pleased with the way the arm came out, so I'm kind of moving on from that at this point, and I'm kind of getting a little more heavy-handed because I'm a little more decisive with my lines, and I'm gonna move on to the lower part of his body because I'm pretty comfortable with the way he's looking from the hip up. If you give your character a face, they're a little more pleasing to look at as well, because you kind of have a focal point. That's something that I always try to get in the early stages, kind of describe a face, because if you're drawing a figure and you don't really know what their face looks like, somebody's face could depict what the rest of their body might look like. I get a little too caught up in the hair, so sometimes it's hard to tell yourself to stop when you get to a certain point in the artwork, but I'm kind of moving on. As you can see, I was kind of like, okay, this might be overworked. Once again, I'm now looking at this. The torso might be a little too front facing compared to the position that the body is in, but that's always something that you can fix later on when you do the final rendition of whatever piece you're working on. There's so many iterations that I go through fixing things and doing studies in particulars. Like, I'll go back and just do a study of the foot, or I'll go back and do a study of just a hand, or if they're holding an object, I'll do a study of that. So it's always good to not just draw something once, but draw it multiple times before you get to the final piece. In this piece, I'm actually gonna blow it up quite large. So if you're blowing something up this big, this this small going to something very large, then it's kind of a waste of whatever materials you might be using, whether it's canvas or paper. You're kind of wasting that material if you don't, if you're unsure going onto that surface. You always want to make sure that you're very certain of what you're going to be putting on that canvas. And for me, it's always characters, it's always landscape, because that's something that I focus a lot on. It's just designing these characters and putting them in environments in general. And I kind of do the characters first, because if they're the focal point, I kind of want to tailor the environment around them, whether I have like some trees swooping around them to kind of guide the viewer's eyes, so that's something I definitely focus on. And you can see here that I'm going back and I'm really focusing on the torso, because I wasn't very happy from the very beginning. So going back and positioning it in that right position, now you kind of see the 3/4 view, and you can see that you're seeing more rib cage now than anything else. And that's something that I should have done from the start. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I was combining so many references at once, and it's easy to get sidetracked and pay attention to one reference more than the other. So you kind of want to hold yourself to, like, whatever your goals are. Always try to focus on getting whatever information you need from one piece, but not getting too caught up in trying to redraw that single piece, if that makes sense. I'm very confident in his pose now, so I'm getting a little darker, shading a little more, and I'm just going in and just building things up. The more you work, the more results you're gonna see. So these things don't take 5-10 minutes. Like, a sketch can take me anywhere from a half hour, 30 minutes to 3 hours, sometimes even more, depending on how detailed I want to go into it. So as long as you keep working and you're making progress, it's always gonna be better. It can always be better, but it's knowing when to call it quits. So now I'm just kind of adding in value, because this is gonna be a piece that I'm gonna use to kind of recreate photo references from. And I'm going in with a Nero, so I switched from an HB, which is what I was using from the start, which is very light, and then I switched to a 3B, to a 6B, and then a 8B. And the clutch pencil that you see me using, or like the leadless ones, are they're Nero, they're Creative Color Nero pencils, and they're the darkest of the dark pencils. So when I'm getting in like shadow lines, or I'm really trying to express something, that's the pencil that I use to express it. And I use a brush to kind of just blend the clo the clothing and the loincloth in, to kind of create some difference between the skin tone and the fabric. I'm kind of trying to play. I'm playing with his hand, making stuff up. You know, this is not from photo reference, and it it kind of gets away from you when you're not using photo references. Like you can see, I kind of switch the hand, creating multiple poses for it, and I think this is the one that I stick with because a fist is easier to draw than some really expressive, dynamic fingers, because hands are one of the hardest things to draw. So, yeah, that's about it. Um, Besides that, I'm just going back in and keep working on it, like I'm saying, and this is something that I'm always doing. It's like, and even when I'm done, I'll go back in maybe another day and I'll keep working on this piece, because artwork is never finished. There's always something to add to it.